Good morning, good afternoon, good afternoon. Welcome to the Engaging Men Q&A with Jay. Hi, I'm Jay Von Howard, Manager of Engaging Men Initiatives here with the Ohio Alliance to End Sexual Violence. This is the Engaging Men Q&A program. If you're new here, this is where we answer all of your common training and technical assistance questions on serving men who are survivors, as well as serving men and engaging them in prevention education. We also talk about things around men's health, men's healing, social and emotional learning, violence prevention, social justice. We bring together subject matter experts to answer all of these technical assistance questions. Today, we'll be having a conversation about men and faith, advocacy and prevention perspectives with Darlene Hill Clinkscale. I'm very excited to have her here with us this afternoon. We'll go ahead and read her bio. She is the founder of Stop It Before It Starts LLC, which educates advocates, agencies, and spiritual communities on how to form partnerships that will strengthen our joint community response and prevention strategies to end gender based violence. She has a master's degree from Youngstown State University with a major in counseling and adult education. Darlene has been part of the movement to end gender based violence for over 30 years. As a prevention consultant, an advocate, a speaker, an educator, survivor, she has completed extensive training, observation, research, and writings on gender based violence prevention and prevalence within and both the non spiritual and the spiritual communities. She has been a member of the faith community since birth. Within the faith community, she has have her and her four children for over 40 years have lived their experience of survivors of domestic violence. So I'm very happy to have Darlene here with us to have this conversation. Again, this conversation is very important around men, faith, and healing. So Darlene,
Hi.
welcome.
Thank
Glad to
you.
have you. I know that you and I have been gearing up for this conversation for a moment. Very excited to have you here today. So, how about this? We just go ahead and just get started. First, can you tell me just a little bit about yourself and how you got into the work and doing this work and in this movement, working with faith communities and working with men?
I experienced domestic violence and gender-based violence with my personally and in the faith community. So when that happened, I thought it was only me because it didn't happen in the faith community. And then, of course, I learned that that is not true. And so after that, I feel the Lord gave gave me a calling to go and learn all I could about gender-based violence and bring it back to the faith community, and that has been my journey for the last 30 years.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the work that you've done, and thank you so much for having the courage to come forward and share your story. Not only share your story, but use this to help create conversations and spaces for other people to have these conversations, especially for men, because you know that my role is working with men who are survivors. Trying to break down those barriers to services for men, and so I felt like this conversation about men and faith was really important to have. I work in different communities, work with different kinds of survivors. But to just similarly to your experience, I've heard about men who may have had experiences of violence and abuse in their lives connected to their faith, and how that has impacted the way that they show up. And so, I have a question for you related to that. Like, why do you believe men aren't coming forward about their own abuse or their own trauma and not telling their own story?
Okay, I think men don't come forward because they equate asking for help as a weakness, and they when they do come forward, they're scrutinized and shamed, and also that within the faith community, excuse me, not within the faith community, but for men in general, they are shamed more than women, even though it happens to women more. But men, because of our culture and where we normalize in a culture how men are to be just strong, powerful, and they can't do anything that's perceived as weakness, right? And so they because of that, the cultural norm, um, we had to create safe spaces for them to come forward. And so, as in reference to the faith community, men coming forward would be, well, it's already problematic with women because in the faith community, a lot of times they're just they may be in denial or they just don't know. And that's not even talked about for the most part. Of course, there are silos where people do, and it's a thing, but for most part, faith community is not talked about. So just for to get through that with women, we that's hard to break the barrier. But when it comes to men, it's even more layered as far as the stigma and the disbelief, or making them feel like it's speaking against their manhood. So they can't, they have even more reasons why they can't disclose it in any community, especially the faith community, because things that we teach in the faith community, push men up to be the head. And a lot of time we don't have conversation around that, what that actually means. And so we take it to mean that you can't be weak, for one thing.
Yeah. I feel like that's very consistent with a lot of the work that I do with men. And I also talk with advocates about that all the time, about men seeking help behaviors, like the help seeking behaviors of men. Men do not come forward to ask for help for any given thing. I think there's the recent statistic that has come out about 51. I believe it's 55%. I'm gonna have to double check this, but I believe it is 55% of men don't actually receive regular health checkups or screenings. That men are so afraid of being seen as weak, that they're not coming forward to even just like go to the doctor and take care of themselves. And at the same time, thinking about it that way of not being just seen as weak, but also like maybe being seen as like they're supposed to have like all the answers. Do you feel like
Yes.
that's something? Cause you mentioned
Yes.
like feeling like they're elevated to be like the head. Does that mean like it's not necessarily being seen as weak all the time, but also just not being seen? Like, what does it mean to be a leader? Like, does that show up? You think in some capacity?
It shows up in a large capacity because most faith communities put the men as head, not all, but most. And because it says that in scripture. But the problem is that the challenge with that is that when we say that, we need to have conversation around it to explain what actually that means, right? Because we can put things out there and they don't, if you don't explain it, then you could take it to just default to culture. Culture's like men are, strong. They're the leaders. They get to say what, the final answer and whatnot. So that could be very dangerous if we don't have conversation around it. And that's why, like as far as learning things about what what the dynamics around gender-based violence and what that entails can help us understand how some things that we say can be taken in the wrong way, and then we can unintentionally do damage and do harm that doesn't have to be if we had the education and training around that.
Right. Like being strong doesn't necessarily mean, it's like trying to think about it from a different perspective, the way that we can talk about it, helping empower men to come forward. Like, to be a leader and to be strong, sometimes this being meaning to be vulnerable, that
Definitely.
it is about like, sometimes being honest, and it's that truth telling about our own experiences. If we're going to be in leadership positions, whether that's in like the family or in the community or even in church, truth telling is like central, because in order for us to really pour into others, we have to make sure we're pouring into ourselves and our own cups are full. And so, yeah, it's like such a prevalent thing that we see where men not coming forward to talk about their abuse and trauma just because they don't feel like they have permission to come forward and seek help.
And
Um,
it's not safe. It's not safe because and because in our culture, the norms in our culture perceive it in a different way. It's being manly and taking over and forceful and whatnot. But leadership means to show, to be loving and show people how they should be, which not would not be trying to control people and just lead in that way, like you're in a war or whatnot. So it just has to be conversation around that to it, so men can understand what that means, because the culture default supports that. It's okay for men to be just overpowering, overbearing, and make whatever you need to happen, make it happen in our
Yeah.
culture. For women, it's not, but for men, it is. And so we generally default to culture when we're doing things. So training around that or understanding around that and conversation around that would be very helpful, so that we can create a safe environment for men to come and share, complications or challenges that they have, such as the trauma they experience from abuse.
Yeah. And I think that's important for men to hear, that coming forward and asking for help is not doesn't mean you're not making things happen. It's like, taking that burden on yourself and on your shoulders to be like, we're as men, our job and our role is to make things happen. Our job and our role is to show up a certain kind of way. But it doesn't necessarily mean that that's mutually exclusive from asking for help. It doesn't mean
Right.
that's mutually exclusive of being able to lean on somebody else for assistance. Like being hyper independent and being independent all the time, though that can be a really powerful thing and it can really make you feel good. At the end of the day, doing things in collaboration and community goes a lot farther. That's even for your health and for your recovery and your healing. Um, so I really appreciate that. And so it's like along lines of that, we know that when we have these conversations about faith and violence and sexual violence, that there's sometimes a lot of different kinds of sensational stories that we hear about survivors experiencing abuse by members of their church. Um, Particularly thinking about like men, how could this impact somebody's faith and how they show up in church themselves, and then thinking about like how could this be a path of healing, and what that could look like to help folks get back into their faith practices that maybe they've maybe been disrupted or disconnected from because of violences or harm that they may have experienced. So it's
Right.
kind of two questions, but
um, okay, so they members do experience violence and trauma, sexual assault, domestic violence, like gender-based um, violence includes domestic violence, sexual assault, um, elderly abuse, and child abuse, right? And so they can experience that in a faith community setting, definitely. In fact, when we talk about statistics for domestic violence in the United States, they say 1 in 4 women. We're talking about the women, and the men. That's a whole nother category because they don't come forth, and we don't know as much as far as how many. So, generally speaking, in the United States, is 1 in 4 women experience in their lifetime, but in the faith community, that becomes 1 in 3. So it's more prevalent in a faith community for so many reasons, because we don't the advocate community and the faith community are usually at a standoff, right? And so we need those two communities to come together so we can share our areas of expertise. And the by doing that, the faith community will be empowered to in prevention, the area of prevention, because a lot of things that we say and we don't even realize that that is causing harm, right? It's perpetuating harm. Just a simple thing as saying that a man is the leader, he's the head, right? And without any conversation around that to explain what it means, then just doing that, and men can just take it where that means that I have to make everybody in my family do what I say and go through harmful means to do that, right? So, so we always ask the questions in a way that we say, well, what can the faith community do to, not have this prevalent? Um, and I think what we need to do, we need to have a cultural shift. for the advocate community as well as the faith community. But when it comes to gender-based violence, in order to have that culture shift, we're going to have to ask the advocate community to do more, because the faith community, they do have, I think that they are um, the leaders as far as taking care of social services for people, right? But they don't have the information as far as what specific to sexual assault and gender-based violence, domestic violence. They don't have that information. But the advocates community, they are over 50 years of expertise in learning and growing and seeing how we need to be there for survivors, as well as what we need to do to prevent this, right? And their expertise in that area. Faith communities are experts in doing the social things for people. They do so many things in their community, which are important. So we need to get these two communities together so that we can't just say, well, what can faith communities do to not let that happen in their community? They can't do it on their own. They need us, the advocate community, right? So we need to re-look at this and say, like we do for other communities, as advocates, we spend a lot of time um, dealing with people what we call underserved populations.
Mhm.
And that would be the men, I think, because we don't address that much, right? And so, in order to service the underserved populations, who are experienced gender-based violence, we find out about that community. We talk to that community. We extend a hand of love, where we say embracing them and create safe spaces for them to be in that community, right? But when it comes to faith communities, the advocates, as a whole, for the most part, they haven't traditionally been doing that, because faith communities have their issues as why they don't. I'm going to just say don't like advocates, and advocates have their reasons that they're not too crazy about faith communities, because faith communities have some things that they do that can perpetuate this. And faith communities think about advocates, you're going to make my people who go through this do things, like, just say, some churches believe like you don't have divorce, or you obey your husband no matter what, right?
Mhm.
So they're thinking about these things, and it's keeping these two communities apart. And what we need to do and start changing is how we look at that. We don't want to have advocates thinking they're going to go into a community just to fix the faith community or change whatever um, they stop them from doing abusive things in that community. You can't fix that community. That community has to fix their own self. So what we want to do instead is thinking of ways how we can get together instead of staying apart. And that would be if advocate community will reframe and say, in order for them to do this, they're going to need the education or the expertise about the fundamentals surrounding gender-based violence, right?
Mhm.
Advocates know that, but faith communities need to know that information in order to help their members. They help their congregants. They help them with that information. And not only do faith community help people in their community, they help people in the world setting. So these two communities need together and get together and figure out a way of doing that, because there are, in the United States, we have 350 over 350 different spiritual or religious communities, organizations in the United States. And out of that, we have 350,000 congregations of different faith communities, right? That's a lot of them, right? And
Yeah.
for, and even like I went to, bring it down, like in Ohio, in Franklin County, Ohio, we have like 900, almost 1,000 different congregations of faith communities, which would give us like every 2 square miles we have one, right? These communities are experts in, attending to the needs of peoples and doing different things and taking on community projects that would help our survivors, right?
Mhm.
And not just in their community, but in the general community, right? And so we need to get information, to share information with them about how to service people with these domestic violence issues, right? We can't fix their communities, but we can share our information. So that would, just encourage advocates to, whenever they have trainings, there's like 40-hour trainings for general fundamentals about domestic violence and gender-based violence. If
Yeah.
um, if those communities would like, maybe get a person to represent in their each congregation to go and get the training and bring it back to the community, then the community can take that knowledge and, in the privacy of their own office or study, they can figure out, what are we saying to our people that we have, that, like, um, just saying the man is the head. That's true, but what are we doing around that so that they won't take it and do things that are harmful? They'll be able to figure that out with education from the community. So it's very important for those communities to get together and change the way we look at each other, because I would give you that faith communities are also underserved population. They got a lot of people, but we don't access them and say, I'm going to make it safe here for you to come to our training. We're not going to be blaming and shaming you for the things you do. We just want you to come in here, and we're going to acknowledge each other as, I have an area expertise as an advocate, agencies, and the faith community has area expertise of ministering to people and doing those social services things, and also setting a precedent for what's right and wrong in our society. They do those teachings, so we need to give them this knowledge that we have. And it's not giving them, it's like partnershiping with them.
Mhm.
Change your frame, and we're going to come in and fix you and tell you what you need to do, because nobody going to let you do that. You don't let nobody come in your house and tell you how to fix your house. So we have to change the way we do, because as advocates we have that. When it comes to faith communities, we do different than we do other communities. We're like, we're going to go in there and, what y'all need to do to fix it? No, how about, you're important, I'm important, we have this expertise, you have that expertise, can you just come to our trainings, and or let us do a training there where you can we can share this knowledge with you, and we trust you to go back in your communities and figure it out, because they're adults. You know what I mean? I'm sorry, I
Yeah.
could go on and on and on and on and
No,
on.
no, you have my thinking about a few different things. So, the first, like a lot of what you're describing is like a prevention tool for the social ecological model. Not only just like the social ecological model, but the like more expansive version of it as well. That includes like environment and history and spirituality as part of like understanding levels and systems of prevention, levels and systems of intervention. And like what you're talking about is really like why it's so important for us to have that expansive model that talks about spirituality. I was just in sort of like refresher course training earlier this week. This week or last week. Time's an illusion. Just reminding us about like how these different things like show up in our lives and create these nuances. Like like you're mentioning, talking about like if my faith, my spirituality, like this allows me from getting divorced. Like I don't believe in divorce. As a system of prevention, as advocates, or a system of intervention, we might offer like let's go to court and get you divorced from your partner. That's a way to help you solve this problem that you might be having. This is the way that we can do safety planning, but that might not necessarily align with someone's like values or with their faith. It may not align with their community or with their family. There's different pressures that are put on people who are survivors, and the way that we navigate that is not necessarily telling them what to do, right, or judging them and saying like, oh, well, if you don't leave, then you must want this, or if you don't leave, then this is how you're looking for violence to be. Like if you don't make certain kind of changes and adjustments in your life, then you must just want to be a victim. And that's that's victim blaming, right? That's not the work of actually believing survivors and working with survivors and being culturally humble and being inclusive. And so it's like you're bridging those gaps there with that. So I really appreciate that. um I think I had another thing as well. This happens every time where like my guests have me thinking about all sorts of stuff, and I forget like all the points because I'm trying not to write down stuff because I'm tuned into what you're saying. Um, but yeah, like I really enjoy everything you had to say with that. And it really had me thinking as well about like what kind of education and training could there be that can help folks reach each other better and build these partnerships. Because at the end of the day, we all are doing the work of trying to end violence, but we are doing this work in a professionalized space. We show up to work as an advocate, but we are more than just an advocate. We do carry values. We do have our different faiths. We do come with different lived experiences, and like how do we take all of those pieces of who we are into account, and all of us as a larger community, uh, and really bridge those gaps, right? So you kind of talked about that a bit. Could you talk a little bit more about the way that maybe faith leaders specifically could work to better serve men who have experienced violence or sexual violence, or better ways that you can recommend for faith leaders to create safer spaces, just even for men to want to feel safer to come forward and disclosing at all? Like, what kind of recommendations would you give?
Okay. And of course, there are several, trainings specifically for men. Of course, you do many of those, and with the engaging men, and ODBN has trainings too, and different organizations that do advocacy. Um, but and that's good, and I think it's a slower process because we just whoever wants us to come in and do those trainings. Let's just take the faith community. You go in and you do that training, and then you go out, and it's so many. Like I already told you, it's a lot of faith communities, and we need them. So it would be whenever you. One thing to suggest is whenever you go and do a training, someone lets you in. Let them know that this is something that you would encourage them to get the basic dynamic training on, and that could be asking a lot, because a lot of times, pastors or faith leaders are overwhelmed with so much to do, right? And so a suggestion would be if they, like I said, would each congregation would get at least one point person to complete trainings to bring it back to their faith community, and be that person that makes sure that is there. And also, if not one point person, just the education department of the faith community, like in the Christian faith, they have Sunday school. Different faiths, they have Sunday school, or some people have church on Saturday, but that Bible the school, that portion of their faith can get endowed with that information and make sure it's done in their faith communities. But a lot of time, I think we put the cart before the horse, because we're trying to get them to do stuff, and they don't have that education first. So that is why it's important to be more inviting. I would suggest that all agencies, whenever you have a training, that you include faith communities and start getting a list of faith communities and just send it out, because a lot of trainings are online, and they could do it that way. They don't even have to be at the in-house where the advocate agency is at, right? So it's very important. The training part is very important. And when they come into training, um, you have to be inviting and realize that they're important partners. Like an example of how that was is processed is, back in the day, we as advocates, um, like the government, like police organizations, and the courts, judges, they were not our friends, because they did things to our survivors that was not helpful, right? For instance, like just an example, in the day it used to be, if somebody had a domestic violence dispute and they called the police, oftentimes that wouldn't go good for the survivor, right? And so we've learned that over the years, even though they did those things that were harmful to our survivors, we realized that we needed to partner with the police and the judges, and have trainings that we share with each other, so that we can better serve our survivors, right? And that is an example of how we need to do with faith communities, right? Get over the differences and don't go in focusing on something that is just going to cause a dispute. You just go in and share training. Like all we want you to do is just to listen to our training and let them know that you know that they're important as you are as an agency in the survivor's life, right? So it's different kind of training. Like Sarnco, I did Sarnco Sexual Assault Response Network of Central Ohio. They have 4 trainings in a year for the basic dynamics or fundamentals of gender-based violence, and also how domestic violence has a training. And I'm sure you all have trainings at your agency, but um, the one that's coming up in January and February in at Sarnco is completely online, and it's all Saturdays. It's 5 Saturdays in a row, and that may be very convenient for faith communities that don't have service on Saturday. So that's I always try to get in people encouraged to go into that training, to see if they could do that. So of course, any of your people, they could connect with you to get the information on it. But that's the first training that starts in a year, and it's a 40-hour training. And if faith communities can sponsor someone, at least one person from their different congregation to go, that would be very helpful because that person can bring that information back. The educational piece is what's missing because you don't know until you know, right? One of my mentors in the field years ago, she told me, because after dealing with the faith community and the advocate community and being in both of those, having a voice in both of those communities, I can see in both communities this is the missing component, and over here is the missing component, and they're not getting together, right? So in seeing that, I wanted to see how I could get them to gather all this year. So at one point I got really frustrated, trying to get because the Lord told me to go back, take it and give it to us so they could, do better. And it just seems like, boy, this is taking forever, right? And I was just like, oh my God, I just want to say, y'all going to hell, right? I had that moment. And then my mentor says to me, she's like, you can't say that to the church people. I said, I know it. I'm not going to say that, but it was the way we felt because we're trying to get them to see and they're not seeing, right? And I just had the moment, and she said, Miss Darlene, it's just, if you don't know, you just don't know. A lot of times we're blaming each other for stuff that they're doing,
which isn't very productive, just to blame each other back and forth,
right? And we don't realize a lot of times that we are blaming each other. Like advocate community, they've taken the time to learn how to work with police and the courts and these people that were doing harms. They've learned how to work with perpetrators that are doing harm to the survivors, what you have to do around that to get them. But they haven't taken the time with faith communities, and that's where you're going to get the most resources to help survivors. That's where you're going to get the most resources as far as prevention, because the things that we can say in there, it's like we can hold perpetrators accountable. In the current system where they don't have any knowledge of this training or anything about gender-based violence, they're not holding them accountable because they're like a lot of times stuck in the culture of man is the head and whatever he says goes. But you can't go in there blaming them for that. You just want to share your knowledge because the educational piece is just lacking. And if you don't know, you don't know, as Miss Tanya would say.
And I think what you were saying before about having like someone like come in, do the training, and go back, even if you're not able to get, everyone mobilized in a particular faith community or congregation, like even if you just get a couple of people to maybe come represent, get the training, and go back, can be a really powerful tool. It has me thinking about some of the ways that some of our rape crisis centers operate across the state already, where they have different kind of advocates in different places. So we have like a campus-based advocate with some locations, right? Whereas like that advocate, has the job training, has some specific skills on how to do crisis advocacy, how to serve survivors, show up for survivors, give support, but they work on campuses. That's where they specifically are providing those services, that they know the nuances and the in and outs of that particular institution. So that way, when someone is within a campus situation, there is an advocate who is an advocate, but also knows the campus situation, or like someone who is a prosecutor's advocate. It's like they're an advocate, but they understand the prosecution really well, or a court advocate, or an advocate who's in a hospital. So what you're suggesting is like maybe for us to invest in a similar type of process for faith communities, have an advocate that is specific for doing outreach and doing that awareness and providing services to survivors who are in faith communities. And I think that's a brilliant idea. We see that replicated in lots of different ways,
You
even
already thought of it, you just haven't used it for faith community.
yeah, we see it with the Department of Defense. They have their advocates for military sexual trauma. They have counselors that are specific for veterans, because a counselor talking to a veteran who has no kind of military history or background or understanding versus a counselor who has been in combat are two very different understandings of context. One counselor is probably going to be like, oh, this person needs to go to an asylum. How could they possibly think that these things are okay? And then there's another person who's like, well, I understand the context of where this is coming from. And like, you had this going on and this happened. This is why this was this way. And so I was just thinking again about how do we think more creatively and expansively on how we serve survivors. And I really want to get a little bit more into specifically on like how do we create some of this work for men. And I know that you mentioned that the work for churches and in faith communities getting involved, and for us as advocates getting more involved, is prevention work. There's so much prevention work that can be done. What kind of prevention work can be done, to better respond to sexual violence, so this is like an opportunity for you to sell it to us, like what is it that, we're missing out on? What are the resources that we could really tap into to start ending sexual violence, and also create more of these, safer spaces for men to feel like that they can come forward about their own experiences as being victims of sexual violence as well.
Right. And for men specifically, unfortunately, you got to start where people are at, because, for instance, if you go into most faith communities and say, well, we want to figure out how to, make it right for men, they already got this stigma and the thing going on where, men are the head and they're not supposed to have any, weakness and stuff like that. So you got to start where they're at. Like when you go in there, like this is a training for, we know that it's, the faith communities may not notice, acknowledge it or know that it's in their community, but it does happen to when, generally speaking, we know that happens to women a lot, right? So you got to start where you're at just to get them educated. Once they get educated, then you can start talking about, go specific to different things that are happening to men also, right? But you can't start there. I'm sorry. I mean, you have to really just get them get that educational piece going. A person who does it, it's called Numa Life in Cleveland, Ohio, and Miss Ruth Johnson. She has an organization where she specifically trains people in the churches, and she has it's a good model of what needs to be done all over, right? So like, when I started like 30 years ago in this industry, I was in Youngstown, and back then, the years I was working there before I moved here to Central Ohio, they always got everything they did. It was like the faith community was the foundation of like all their trainings and everything. They realized that, right? And Sergeant Delphine Baldwin Casey, she was with the Youngstown Police Force, and she headed that up, right? So when I moved down to Central Ohio, I was like, I couldn't understand what they weren't including faith community at all in that, for the most part, right? And I couldn't understand that. So like here, we're starting at square one to just start saying that should be included. Like they're the missing component in the joint community efforts to end gender-based violence. faith communities are, right? You have all these primary institutions like the government, the family, um, and you and education, but the faith community is missing. So we need to get them in there and get all the training. As far as the training, you have to start with the basics first. That's why I recommend the agencies that give the training, right? And then after that, we have many advocates in Ohio who are faith-based people, right? And when I came down here, it felt like I had to hide that part to work with the advocate community, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they have so many things to say in the faith communities do. And I feel like after being here this long down here in Central Ohio, I've learned that it is so many of it's just a whole lot of people that are faith community and they're advocates too, but we're not connecting them. So within the advocate community, you have a lot of faith-based people. You can like reach out to them too to get that in faith communities, right? Because you have people who are already trained that are actually advocates. And I was like noticing a lot of them. And I was trying to pull that together. If the agencies can pull that together, that would be good because it's just after you get the basic education from the agencies, then there are a lot of faith communities, like Numa Life in Cleveland, and you have a Call to Peace that is a faith organization that they have online training every Tuesday. And if you can't get it online, you during that live presentation, you could get it they'll record it, but that's a fee that's expensive, but it's worth it. But you can need the basic training first, and then you also have there's so many. I have a whole list of different organizations that you can get training from. Of course, I'll get that to you, and then when people contact you, could give them that information. But it's very important to know that the basic training is needed first before you go into the specific faith-based training. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
After observing all these years, yeah.
Okay.
I don't
Interesting.
know. Did I answer your question? Because you know me, I'll go off into.
Yeah, I think we got into it a bit. We're at the point where we're going to open up for any questions that might have come in through the comment section. And so I think there's a couple questions that might have come in that are similar to a follow-up question that I wanted to ask. And so, my follow-up question, and I'm going to pull up this question for us to kind of get into, was kind of like thinking about, like, how do we in the meantime get past some of those barriers, because we know that there are men who are survivors who are already underserved, mainly because a lot of these barriers. And so it's like, what can we do in the meantime to help create conditions where we can still reach those survivors in these spaces? Because I think about it, like, from a perspective of like my own like oppression and marginalization in as like a Black person, as a Black man, in a way of being told, like, we have to wait until other folks are taken care of a certain way, that other rights are being seen before we're able to start operating in a certain way. And so, like, there is that component of like, yes, there should be education and foundations and interventions in place, because then folks need to know in order to do anything. But at the same time, there's still like work that needs to be done. And how do we create that space in the meantime that serves survivors without them having to wait for the folks who, are okay and aren't experiencing trauma, then to start trying to pay attention and to care. And so one of the questions that kind of came through um, was, are we not past the kids' gloves approach? Meeting people where they are doesn't create the uncomfortable space that's sometimes required for change. And so I think the question is like, what does that mean about like meeting people where they are? Like, are we past the kids' gloves approach when trying to engage survivors and engage our communities?
Hey, Miss Dom. Yeah. Um, no, we're not. But anyway, that's just my opinion. But you have to judge each situation differently, because some people are at a place when you can go in harder, and some people aren't. The faith community, for the most part, is not. You gotta. I always say You got to learn how to give them a hug and just convince them how we, whatever we can do to partner so you could just hear this information and talking about faith communities. Because going in hard would be me speaking to the advocate community that I need y'all to do more because they're not going to come to us and we need them to get this stuff right so they can help people and do prevention. I don't know if that answered, but
Yeah.
explain it to me more if I didn't.
Well, I mean, your answer is your answer. Like, I think that sounded perfect. Like, yeah. So we were talking about like, faith leaders and like how we're engaging like those institutions of communities, like, you know, they meeting them where they are. It's like, yeah, and that's perfectly fair. Like, if we still aren't past that, then that's just where we are, right? And it does kind of feel a little disappointing that, in so many communities that we're engaging with trying to end sexual violence, that we're still in like, so much of that education phase where we know that we need so much like behavior change and structural change and so many just services just for support. And so hopefully like these type of conversations and like folks hearing from you today will give folks new ideas and understanding to understand like how we can better commit to producing these partnerships and how we can better create these collaborations. Because at the end of the day, we want to create Ohio that is free from violence. We need to create an Ohio that's free from violence. That includes everybody,
Yes.
folks that we don't maybe understand or who don't align with us all the time. We all deserve to live free from violence. And so, I'm very proud and very happy to have you with me this afternoon to talk about all of this. I don't see any other questions coming through the chat. For any folks who are joined with us, feel free to drop any questions that you have in the chat, either on Facebook or on YouTube. We're here to answer any of your technical assistance questions that you have for Darlene and I about serving men survivors, working with men who are in faith communities, whether that is survivors or prevention. Tell us a little bit about what it is that you do to reach men who are in faith communities. We have a couple more minutes together. We'd love to hear from anybody who is joining with us. And while we're waiting for that, again, like, thank you, Darlene. Do you have
I
any
always have something to say.
questions? Any closing for me? Any closing comments that you want to leave with those who are listening about, something you got going on that you're excited about? Maybe, any just like closing statements that you have that to summarize everything you've said today.
Oh, wow. I do want to say that you were talking about what can we do. I appreciate the work that you do, right? The engaging men, because that was my thing. I want to talk to the men because they are leaders, and we need men in order to end it, right? And so what you are doing of going out and speaking to the men, that's phenomenal because that's going to speak to prevention and getting cultural change when they become aware of what this is, right? And can start realizing that they are needed in this what we do in order to end gender-based violence. So I really appreciate what you do. I thank you for, even though I don't like to be speaking, I'm committed to doing it, and I appreciate you allowing me this space to do that in.
Yes. So thank you so much for your commitment. We would be, we wouldn't know as much as we know now without you. So thank you so much. I'm seeing just a bit of love coming in to the comments for you and for our conversation, but no questions. With that being said, we're going to start our closing. Thank you again, Darlene,
Thank you.
so much for joining us. We will definitely be in touch. We'll love to have you back again. And then for the rest of us, a few things. Bye. Love Darlene. I've been working with Darlene for a few years now, which is wonderful, wonderful being able to have that opportunity. We are closing today. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for the Engaging Men Q&A with Jay. This was our conversation on men and faith and advocacy and prevention. We will be having our next conversation in 2026. Can you believe it? This is our final Q&A of 2025. We will have our next one in 2026. This one will likely be on the topics of digital abuse, sextortion, online harassment, and serving men, engaging men around those topics. If you have any questions that you would like to submit about that topic, feel free to scan the QR code here. This will take you to my engagement training and technical assistance form, where you can submit any kind of questions that you have for my Q&As. You can also find on that form any trainings, resources, information requests that you might have for Engaging Men. For me, as the manager of Engaging Men initiatives, feel free to fill that out, and I will be happy to get back to you with any of your requests. With that being said, thank you all so much for joining, and we'll see you next time.